Welcome to Mr. Hutchings History, where the past comes alive. Let's dive into today's story.
All right, so we're going deep on this question that's been debated for decades. Did Martin Luther King Jr. single-handedly create the civil rights movement? Or was he shaped by forces already in motion? You know, I think we've got some really interesting historical perspectives to dig into today.
It's interesting. It really isn't just about King, though. We'll be looking at all these factors that play off each other, like everyday people at the grassroots level, the influence of people like King, and what the government did.
Yeah, I was really struck by this idea I came across in the research. The movement might have actually followed a similar path even if King hadn't been around. Professor Claiborne Carson, he's a prominent social historian, and he argues that Black students, unions, and community organizations were already really active fighting racial injustice long before King was a national figure.
That great man view of history that Carson is pushing back against, it puts so much emphasis on individual leaders. But his argument is that if you just focus on King, you're missing the bigger picture, all those crucial forces that were already happening.
Right, and that makes sense when you think about, the Montgomery bus boycott. Most people think of King right away, but it really started with Rosa Parks and E.D. Nixon, local activists who were organizing the boycott before King was even there.
The Montgomery bus boycott is a perfect example of grassroots activism being a catalyst, and it shows how people in power react to pressure. The boycott relied so much on resources within the Black community. They set up these alternative transportation systems. It made it almost impossible for the authorities to just shut it down.
So you have all this incredible activism, but it's still local, right? So that's where King comes in.
Right. King might not have been the initial spark, but his leadership during the boycott really amplified the impact. As a spokesperson for the Montgomery Improvement Association, his commitment to nonviolence and his powerful speeches, all that got national attention and brought the struggle for civil rights to a much wider audience.
Yeah, he had this incredible gift, connecting with people, Black and white, and inspiring them to act.
He did. But even within the movement, there were different opinions about King's role. Like Ella Baker, an amazing figure who organized so much of the movement, she famously said, "The movement made Martin rather than Martin making the movement." So even back then, people were debating where King's influence came from.
Wait, so even Ella Baker, who was right there in the movement, thought that King's fame was more effect than cause.
Yeah.
That's wild. What else do we know about her perspective?
Baker was all about grassroots organizing, empowering local communities. She was a bit wary of charismatic leaders overshadowing all the work of everyday people. She believed the real strength of the movement was in its decentralized nature.
So it's more complex than just saying King made the movement. We have these powerful grassroots movements. We have King's charisma and communication skills. How do you reconcile all that?
That's the question, isn't it? It really highlights how complex historical analysis can be. The movement didn't solely rely on King, but his leadership did bring a sense of national unity, and that helped to focus the goals of all these different groups. It's about understanding the individual contributions within this much larger landscape.
Okay, so we're starting to see how all these pieces fit together. But it wasn't just about grassroots activism and inspiring leaders, right? Institutions like the Supreme Court and the federal government also played a big part.
Absolutely. You can't separate the civil rights movement from those big Supreme Court decisions. And the federal legislation. Look at Brown v. Board of Education in 1954, declaring school segregation unconstitutional. That was huge for the movement. It laid the legal foundation for desegregation across the country.
Right, but even with the ruling like that, I imagine there was still resistance. Did Brown v. Board of Education really change things overnight?
Oh, it definitely didn't happen overnight. Brown v. Board of Education was a key legal victory. But there was huge opposition, especially in the South. Implementation was so slow, it was often met with violence and defiance. You have to remember that just because something is declared legal doesn't mean social norms change automatically. That's where the interplay between legal action and grassroots activism is crucial.
So you have this legal foundation from the highest court, but you still need activists on the ground, risking their lives to actually make those rights a reality.
Exactly. Historians like David Garrow, he focuses on the institutional aspects of the movement, and he makes this interesting point. That federal intervention, through judicial decisions like Brown v. Board of Education, and later through legislation like the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, that was essential in supporting those activists and ultimately dismantling segregation.
So even with those big wins in the courts and in Congress, the movement wouldn't have been as effective without the courage of the people on the front lines. challenging segregation every day.
Absolutely. And to really grasp how big that grassroots effort was, we need to understand organizations like the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, and the Congress of Racial Equality, CORE. These groups were vital to voter registration efforts. And the incredibly brave and dangerous Freedom Rides that challenged segregation on interstate buses.
It makes me think of Fannie Lou Hamer, that local activist in Mississippi. She endured arrest, beatings, awful abuse, just for trying to register Black voters. That courage is hard to even imagine.
Her story, and there are countless others, it shows just how important individual bravery was. What's so striking about Hamer is that she wasn't a big national figure like King. She was so rooted in her community, she drew strength from the people around her. That localized activism really gets to the heart of what historian Charles Payne calls the social history perspective on the movement.
What's the core idea behind that social history perspective? It sounds like it's about more than just leaders.
Payne and others who share that view. They say the movement's success wasn't just about top-down leadership or legal wins. They focus on what everyday people did, all the actions that fostered empowerment in Black communities. It's about the power of community organizing, shared experiences, and developing a collective identity.
That's so interesting. So you have King's unifying leadership at the national level, and then this incredibly powerful force of people organizing locally. It sounds like those two things were working together.
It is this fascinating interplay between individual leadership and collective action. And figuring out those dynamics is what makes studying the civil rights movement so compelling.
Okay, we're getting a bigger picture here. We've got the impact of national figures like King, the power of those grassroots organizations, and those crucial legal victories and federal intervention. It's definitely not a simple story of one person making it all happen.
You got it. The civil rights movement was like a tapestry, woven from so many different threads, and you can only appreciate its complexity and lasting impact by understanding how all those forces interacted.
Yeah, it's amazing how once you understand the historical context, this back and forth between different forces, it really changes how you see things. I'm starting to see how these same things are playing out even now.
It makes you think, how did these historical narratives influence activism today? How do you find a balance between strong, visible leaders and the importance of movements at the grassroots? Big national organizations versus local initiatives.
Exactly. Like, if we focus too much on leaders, does that take away from the power of everyday people working in their communities?
That's the struggle a lot of movements face, right? On the one hand, you need someone like King to bring national attention, get everyone behind a cause. But if you only focus on those charismatic leaders, you miss all the work of the people behind the scenes.
Right, it's like this hero worship. That ignores the real problems. It's like if we just had the perfect leader, everything would fix itself.
Right. Social change is rarely the result of just one person. It takes so many people working for a long time. That's what makes real progress.
I'm thinking about the Montgomery bus boycott. It makes you realize just how powerful collective action is. Thousands of people every day. Not riding the buses, organizing carpools, walking to work and school.
It completely disrupted the city, brought segregation into the national spotlight. It was that commitment, the sacrifice of everyday people in that community, that forced the city to change.
The ripple effects of that one local action are crazy. The Montgomery bus boycott. It wasn't just a turning point for the city. It was a turning point for the whole civil rights movement. It showed everyone what's possible when people come together.
It really was a perfect example of how even small acts of defiance can have a huge impact. When people unite and say no to injustice, they can challenge anything.
But it wasn't just inconvenience for the people boycotting. All those activists in the South, they were risking their lives. We can't forget the violence, the threats. It must have been terrifying.
Their courage is unbelievable. People put their lives on the line for justice. Their stories remind us that real change often comes at a high price.
It's easy to look back and celebrate the wins, but we can't forget what they went through. I think that's something we need to remember today. Fighting for social justice takes guts. It can be tough.
It absolutely can be, and sometimes it's dangerous. But the civil rights movement showed us it's necessary. We have to fight injustice, work toward a better world.
And I think King understood that those risks were all part of something bigger. It wasn't just about being morally right. It was about exposing the system.
You're right. King really understood the power of nonviolent direct action. It wasn't about being passive. It was about creating a contrast so stark that it would reveal the brutality and the injustice of segregation.
It's like he knew exactly how they would react.
He did, and he used it. Those iconic images, the police dogs, the fire hoses, those weren't accidents. They were the result of a strategy to provoke a response so shocking that it would wake up the nation.
It's almost scary to think of.
It was a risk, but it worked. Those images went everywhere. They made people see the reality of segregation in a way words never could. The public outrage helped push for change and led to crucial civil rights laws.
So King's vision, working together with that grassroots action, it's incredible how complex these movements are.
And even within the civil rights movement, things weren't always perfectly aligned. There were disagreements about strategy and goals. The movement was never just one thing. Those tensions led to fragmentation as it grew, as it started tackling issues like segregation in the North and the economic inequality that was everywhere.
That makes sense. Once they achieved some of the first goals, like desegregation, those deeper problems would become more obvious. I imagine not everyone agreed on how to deal with them.
Exactly. That's where people like Stokely Carmichael and the Black Power movement come into the picture. They challenged King's approach, arguing that nonviolence wouldn't be enough to dismantle the systems of oppression, especially in the North. They pushed for more radical action, focusing on Black self-determination and economic power.
So even within the movement, there was debate about how to move forward.
Of course. Successful movements are messy and dynamic. They evolve. There's never one clear path.
It's like those arguments and disagreements. They're a sign that the movement is really alive, that it's changing and adapting. If everyone always agreed, it might mean they weren't really facing the issues.
That's a great point. We like to think of social movements as this unified force, but it's so much more complex. Internal debates and disagreements often mean a movement is really digging into the complexities, really thinking critically.
And that critical thinking, questioning assumptions, considering different viewpoints, that's essential for any movement that wants to make real change.
Exactly. That's why studying history is so valuable. We can learn from the past, both the successes and the failures, understand the different perspectives that have shaped the fight for social justice, and use those lessons to inform our own activism.
And talking about learning from the past, there's one part of the civil rights movement we haven't really discussed yet. I think it's especially relevant now.
I'm all ears.
I'm thinking about how good they were at building coalitions, bringing together people from so many different backgrounds to fight for a common cause. How did they do that? Build those bridges and create such a diverse and powerful movement.
That multiracial coalition, it was crucial to their success. It wasn't just Black people fighting for Black rights. It was people from all walks of life, demanding justice and equality for everyone.
That feeling of solidarity, working together for a more just world, we need that today.
I completely agree. So many of the problems we face today, climate change, economic inequality, systemic racism, they're all so complex and connected. We can't solve them alone. We have to build bridges, find common ground, work together.
Yeah, I agree. But how do we actually do that? How do we build those coalitions in a world that feels so divided? It's like we're constantly being bombarded with messages that highlight our differences.
That's the question, isn't it? It's a tough one. But I think the civil rights movement gives us some clues.
So we're talking about these coalitions and trying to make change. In a world that feels pretty divided, what are those clues from the civil rights movement?
One of the most important things is finding shared values and goals. Even if we're from different backgrounds, we all want a more just world.
Right. Focus on what unites us, not what divides us. But it seems so hard sometimes.
It's definitely not easy, especially when everything around us seems to emphasize our differences. But remember, even in the civil rights movement, there were disagreements and tensions. The movement was made up of so many different groups, but they found ways to work together.
How do they do that? Bridge those divides?
They were willing to listen to each other, learn from different experiences. The movement created spaces for dialogue, where people could share their perspectives and find that common ground. It's about realizing that our own experiences aren't everything and being open to other people's viewpoints.
That's tough these days. With social media, everyone's stuck in their own little bubbles. It's easy to just ignore or even attack people who think differently.
Yeah. It is easy to just surround yourself with information that agrees with you. But that just makes those divisions worse. You have to break out of those echo chambers. Talk to people who challenge your assumptions. It's uncomfortable. But that's where real understanding comes from.
It's amazing how the civil rights movement can teach us about that today. Those activists were facing such intense opposition, real danger, and they still managed to build those powerful coalitions.
It shows how committed they were, how strategic. They knew that real change takes more than just passion. It takes collaboration, compromise, and a willingness to work with people who are different from you. We're all part of the same human community. Our fates are connected.
So it's not just about finding common ground. It's about embracing those differences, seeing them as a strength. Like that saying, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
Exactly. The civil rights movement worked because it had so many different perspectives. Students, teachers, lawyers, farmers, religious leaders, labor organizers, artists, musicians, all these people coming together with their own unique skills and experiences. That diversity made them strong.
It's incredible to think about. All those different people working for the same thing. It makes you wonder what those coalitions would look like today. What kind of bridges can we build to face our own challenges?
That's the question we should all be asking. What are those shared values and goals that can bring us together? What are the issues that really matter to us? And how can we work with people who see things differently? These problems are too big for any one person or group to solve. We need each other.
That's true. But it's easy to feel overwhelmed. What can regular people do? How do we turn all this talk into something real?
Even small actions can make a difference. We all have some influence, no matter how big or small. We can use that influence to create change, make choices in our lives that reflect our values.
So what does that actually look like?
It could be as simple as learning about the things that matter to you. Read books, listen to podcasts, watch documentaries, talk to people with different viewpoints. The more we understand, the better we can act.
Okay, education is a good start. But once we know more, how do we actually do something?
Use your voice. Speak out against injustice. Write to your elected officials. Share information on social media. Talk to your friends and family.
Right, even those conversations can be powerful.
Absolutely. Just starting a dialogue can change minds. Those conversations don't have to be arguments. Talk to people with respect, even when it's hard.
Listen more than you talk. Try to understand. But sometimes talking isn't enough. Sometimes you have to take action.
You're right. One of the most important things we can do is hold each other accountable. If you see someone doing something harmful, say something.
That can be really tough.
Yeah.
Especially if it's someone you care about.
It is. But silence can be just as bad. We have to be willing to have those hard conversations. Accountability isn't about punishment. It's about helping people understand so they can make better choices.
Yeah.
We need a culture where we all feel like we can speak up.
So we've talked about educating ourselves, using our voices, having tough conversations, and holding each other accountable. What else can people do?
Our choices as consumers matter. Support businesses that do the right thing. Boycott companies that don't. Buy sustainable products. Every dollar you spend is a vote for the world you want.
Right. Making choices that reflect our values. What about getting involved in organizations?
That's a great way to connect with people and make a bigger impact. There are so many organizations doing amazing work. Find one that speaks to you. Volunteer your time. Donate your skills. Participate in protests. There's a place for everyone.
I love that. And it's not about being perfect. It's about showing up,
Yeah.
doing the work, never giving up.
Exactly. And this work is a marathon, not a sprint. There will be setbacks, challenges, times when you feel discouraged. Don't give up. Take care of yourself. Find joy in your activism.
Self-care is so important.
It really is. Find your people who share your values, and celebrate the wins along the way. Even when things are tough, remember, you're not alone.
It's inspiring to think about all those people working for change.
Right.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the civil rights movement,
Yeah.
what's the one thing you want our listeners to take away?
We all have a responsibility to make the world a better place, no matter who you are, where you come from. You have the power to make a difference. It's not about being perfect. It's about showing up and never giving up.
That's powerful. It reminds me of the whole spirit of the civil rights movement, that belief in a better world and the willingness to fight for it.
And as Dr. King said, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. Let's keep bending that arc together.
On that note, I want to thank you for joining us on this dump dive. I hope you learned something. Keep exploring these ideas and find your own way to make a difference.
It was my pleasure. Remember, the fight for justice continues. Find your voice, find your community, and let's keep working together.
Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep fighting the good fight.
Thanks for listening to Mr. Hutchings' History. Keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.